right, so welcome in. We're joined here today by Matt Brown. He's got the Extra Points newsletter and podcast, I believe. And I kind of hate to do it, but I'm gonna plug it. I mean, you gotta. I go to it. I've definitely referenced it before. I read it constantly. You're really kind of doing God's work out there because it's just such a cool subject, and there's not a lot of people doing it, especially at this level. So it's really an honor for me to have you on here today. So thanks for doing that.
Hey, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the kind words. Like that's the old business adage, right? Is that niche makes you rich, right? So
Yeah,
I recognize that I'm writing college sports content that maybe isn't going to get the same number of clicks as Alabama's depth chart, but for the people
exactly.
that want to read about finance and UConn football scheduling, I'm your Huckleberry baby. I'm glad I'm glad that I found those people out there that have let me build a
Oh yeah,
business.
yeah. Well, absolutely, and it drives a lot more than you think. It's there's a lot of stuff going behind the scenes that
For sure.
ultimately leads to say Alabama's depth chart or something like that.
Oh yeah, unquestionably. I mean, it's easy, I think, to forget the college component to college athletics. And it's not a criticism of other reporters because if you need to be at practice twice a week and you have to hit every presser, you don't have time to FOIA financial reports or talk about the university's relationship with their deans. There's so much placed upon you. The fact that I can focus on all that other stuff, um, I think makes sense. And you're absolutely right. What happens off the field, both with your athletic department's ability to get money, how that fits in with their educational mission, how that fits in with demographics, administrative policies. That's what helps shape what happens on the field.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and something I've heard you talk a lot about is like institutional profile and what does your college look like, and that can be kind of the foundation for how you can compete. Uh, you know, over a decade or whatever.
Yeah, unquestionably. Like there's we kind of forget about this, even just like within Division One, that there's so many very different kinds of schools. We have regional, state flagship institutions like my alma mater, Ohio State. You have a population that's the size of a small city. You have an endowment that's $11 gajillion, and you have different problems than a small liberal arts college or a religious oriented institution or a tuition dependent private school, and they all compete within Division One. They're starting sports for different reasons. They're getting money from different places. They have to worry about who's actually going to show up and pay tuition in different pools. And this plays a huge impact on what sports each institution sponsors, what they decide to invest in, and how they get and spend their money, without
Oh yeah,
question.
yeah. Well, I guess maybe one of the things to kind of kick it off is a framework in which a lot of these discussions are being had, which is what does the future of college football look like? Because kind of in that context that you're talking about, with all the way down to Division 3 rowing, all the way up to Alabama and Ohio State football, they almost don't look like the same animal. And we're starting to see, I guess, a lot of people asking questions. I don't know if it's what the drivers are, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. If it's NIL, if it's the money in the TV deals, if it's the playoff, if it's all of it, if it's whatever, it's starting to get people to ask, okay, realistically, is top tier Division 1 college football something different that maybe needs to be treated differently than uh, all the other sports and or other levels of that sport.
Yeah,
Maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe what's driving that conversation, because now it seems like everybody's having it when before it was not really talked about.
sure. You're absolutely right. Like it would be, to say nothing of like Ohio State and Ohio Dominican, like a Division One, Division Two school. Like that's clearly not the same animal. But I think anybody that's within this industry recognizes that Ohio State and Ohio aren't really
Yeah.
playing by the same rules. And if we're being really honest, Ohio State and Oregon State aren't really doing that, right? Like even their stratification, even within the Power Five. So right now there are two different, I would say, there's major forces that are kind of pushing down on what the future of college, of big time college football is going to look like. And one of those is coming from the courts and from forces outside of the NCAA. Listeners may be familiar with the Supreme Court Alston decision that went 9-0, which really limited the NCAA's ability to cap what a school might spend on education awards for athletes. But if you look at the actual opinion, it makes it pretty clear that there's a lot of skepticism about the nature of amateurism within even the more conservative court members, which matches what we've seen out of the Ninth District and maybe some more progressive-minded jurists throughout the system. This idea here that a student could work more than 25 hours a week, subject their body to potential harm for an enterprise that brings in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and then not be financially compensated for it because we've never that's just because we've always done it. That doesn't carry the same legal weight that it used to. And I've talked to several athletic directors about this, big schools and small schools, recognizing we have to at least plan for a world where college athletes are legally employees, and where schools then have to pay them salaries and pay them workers' compensation, which is how we ended up with the term student athlete anyway. So the NCAA could avoid doing that, or the member schools could avoid doing that. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that has to be considered here. The very nature of amateurism itself, and I use that in quotes, it will face pressure from courts and from Congress and the National Labor Relations Board, external forces. You also have a reevaluation of what's happening from internal forces. When a new NCAA constitution passed a couple of weeks ago in Indianapolis, which moves a lot of authority outside of Indianapolis to member institutions at the division level. There's going to be a new division. Yeah, please go.
Touch on that real quick. So
let's get in the weeds there.
NCAA, I guess people kind of view it, maybe fans, as like this separate thing, but it's essentially the institutions themselves make up the NCAA, right? Or could you talk a little bit about that? Like what exactly the NCAA is, maybe how many people are there, what, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a very common misconception, right? I think there's an idea from some fans that Mark Emmert is sitting in Indianapolis as with this army of people that like single-handedly makes decisions in college sports. Mark Emmert does have some authority, and there are full-time employees of the NCAA, lots of them, because there's almost 1,000 member schools. But NCAA policy, whether that's how they investigate infractions, to how they run tournaments, to what sports they sponsor, all of that power flows from the member institutions. So I tell everybody, if there's something that the NCAA does that you hate, it isn't because of Mark Emmert specifically, although he may have had a hand in it. It's because the president and the athletic director of your alma mater want it that way. They are the institutions that define what amateurism looks like. They're the ones that set up this infractions process that everybody hates. They're the ones that created a constitution and a legislative structure that is extremely complicated, more complicated, arguably, than the system it takes to pass actual honest to God laws. So this change here said, like, all right, we're going to have new articles of confederation. Basically, we're going to remove a lot of that power that we've given to Indianapolis and told Division I, hey, you guys set up your own rules. And if Division I says we want to create a new division, like a Division IV, essentially, that's either like super big boy football or some subdivision of basketball or baseball or something else, you can do that. And what's happened even within Division I, which is 330 something institutions, the schools are so different that it's very difficult to pass legislation and to think of bylaws or procedures that would impact everybody. You have schools with $200 million in their budgets, and you have schools with $8 million in their budgets. You have schools
and are all the
26. Yeah.
Are all the schools represented equally, or how does that work?
Not well. It used to be.
Does University of Michigan have more say than Middle Tennessee State or something, or how does that?
Well, in some ways, it is one school, one vote. It's like when the Constitution itself was passed, University of Michigan and Hope College had the same number of votes. And for a long time, this bugged the hell out of the big schools because there's a lot more little schools than there are big schools. And that's what led to the idea of autonomy conferences, what we call the Power Five. Those are conferences that within college football have disproportionate legislative power. And they demanded that because they wanted to be able to have the flexibility to pass rules that would only impact them. So if you're Michigan and you want to spend more money on your athletes for something, and you don't want to be constrained by all the broke boys that are in the group, that's why you push for autonomy legislation. And when you talk to a big time AD now, they're going to say, what we really want from this new constitution is more autonomy for power conferences. And whenever you hear somebody say that, what they're actually saying is, we want more money. because they already have a ton of autonomy, or we want more access to championship events. And so that's one of the big fights that's happening here. The schools that make all the money want to keep more of that money, and they want to dominate more access to postseason events. And the smaller schools, we're trying to figure out, how do we maintain the championship events we already have, and maintain a system here where we can pass rules that work for us when we're not operating in the same playing field. And that could look a lot of different ways right now. There's no AD can tell you exactly what this new constitution is going to look like. That can tell you what the battle lines are going to be. But it is, I think, safe to assume that by August, college football and Division I college sports generally is going to look different. Like, I feel very confident the men's tournament is going to look very different in a year and a half than it does right now.
Yeah. Wow. What do you think the expansion of or potential expansion of the college football playoff would do for kind of not all the way down the tiers, but maybe Power Five versus some of the conferences just on the edge? Does that change their sort of bargaining power and the power dynamic, because maybe there's slots in this month long tournament at the end of the year for everybody, or for a bigger piece? Or does it, what kind of effect do you think that might have? Or
I mean, the unpopular and lousy radio answer is, a lot of it really depends, right? It depends not just on how the playoff expands and what kind of access these other conferences get, but also, more importantly, how the money's distributed. Because right now, the overwhelming majority of that revenue, but not all of the revenue, is given to the power conferences. And the Sun Belt and Conference USA get a small chunk, right? And even if you expand the playoff to 12 and you guarantee a group of 5 team makes that, gets the sacrificial lamb bid and gets one of those things, Conference USA is probably never going to get that bid, or they're going to get that bid maybe once a decade. And so it depends on how much how the money is distributed. The other important thing to remember, and this also sometimes gets lost in the legislative weeds, the NCAA doesn't really control college football, at least at the FBS level. They don't run the college football playoff. In fact, this is a source of a lot of consternation, because the NCAA has to pay for the enforcement. When somebody breaks the rules, it's NCAA investigators that have to get involved. But the college football playoff runs the playoff, and they distribute the money. And that's not an official NCAA sport. So honestly, if I was to think of the tournament changes that would impact how the NCAA is set up the most, I'd look towards the expansion of the men's and women's basketball tournaments as being more impactful than the college football playoff. Because for everybody, it's the money from the tournament that funds the Big South and the Big Sky and the Colonial Athletic Conference. And how that money is distributed is very much up for negotiation right now.
Okay. And so one thing that I noticed is, like, some of the bigger, I guess it's not just a question of money. It's a question of, like, desire to compete and maybe history, marketability. You've got the Big Ten and, the SEC are very big schools, very deep pocketed. But then you've got, kind of like the hedge funds with classes and the Ivy League that, they, if they ever just sort of decided to compete in college football, they would maybe be able to rise up the ranks quickly. What kind of drives that? Is that just a decision by administrators and kind of, the pulse of this college to whether they're going to do it? Or is it, I guess what I'm asking is sort of the chicken before the egg. Is it like these schools are in the Power Five, so they have the TV money, so they want to spend the TV money, so they want to compete? Or is it, a school on the outside might be able to just kind of rev up the gears and almost push their way into a higher level of play? Or is there still enough limitation on kind of the spending and different things that might prevent them from jumping into top tier football or something like that?
Yeah. I'll try to answer that. Like, as I wonder if there's been a generation of fans that have had their minds skewed a little bit by the college football video game, where you would think that college football in particular is a meritocracy, and that simply by winning a bunch of games, you can move up and then get better recruits and get better money. But college football was really much more like European old money. You're in the Power Five right now, with a couple of exceptions, but typically because of the friends you made in 1910 and the kind of school that you are, because most of the schools in the Power Five are big flagship state institutions, R1 research schools. And most of those you're right, most of those were decisions that happened around the turn of the century. Michigan was the first school west of the Ivy League to really get really into big time football. And so they have this huge institutional head start, right? And if we were redrawing these lines now, would Oregon State or Indiana or certainly not Baylor, be in that same conversation? Probably not. But it's because you had a governor kind of push you in at some point, or somebody advocated for you a long time ago. And if you are a high achieving school outside of that footprint, it is extremely difficult to move. Like, ask Boise State. Boise State has done anything that anybody could have possibly asked them to do on the field, and became a national brand. But because, one, they're in Boise, and two, they were literally a truck driving commuter college back in like the 1970s. There is no meritocracy, right? There's no Horatio. There's no way you can kind of join the Big 12 and play up that way unless things change. BYU won a freaking national championship in 1984, and it required a gigantic chasm within the sport before they had to be accepted. So for every UCF that kind of plays their way in a little bit, or like an Oregon who bought their way in and then kind of played their way in, there's a Rutgers who doesn't deserve to be in this conversation at all, or just everybody else that moves in by inertia. That's one of the issues. There's a little bit more flexibility in basketball, where you could theoretically decide we're going to spend a lot of money, and if everything breaks right, we can be in a better league, and we can be like a Davidson or a Dayton or a George Mason for a little while. That doesn't really exist in football, and it takes
Is that
so
just the
much
difference in the sustained spending that you would have to do, or?
That's part of it. Football, just by its very nature, is this a kind of podcast where I can swear, or would we prefer not to do that?
I prefer not to.
You prefer not to? Okay, good to know. So it just takes an enormous amount of money, because you have 85 scholarships, 100 players on your roster, 10 football coaches, a $60 million stadium. And then you need to have a new athletic directors, personnel trainers, sports information directors. Like, you can't do that on the cheap. So it takes tens of millions of dollars a year sustained to grow. Then you have to get lucky, because for every time somebody wins a college football game, somebody loses. And a lot of this is luck. And recruiting is generally dominated by the same schools that have been getting the best players since the 40s. It's like it's hard to move up that way. It's a little bit easier in basketball, where realistically you need two guys who are really good, and a good coach to kind of play your way into it. One of the things that's important, and I read about this a lot though, is as schools may want to be playing Division I college football for reasons that have nothing to do with anything that's on the field, and that they might define success or achieve their institutional goals even if the team sucks, which, because of the way the finances, the sport, the way the school setup might work, you can do that. That there's a reason why New Mexico State is still playing at this level, even though, God bless them, they're awful, and they've been awful our entire lives, and they're going to be awful for my children's lives. That's not the point for them. It can be a little bit counterintuitive that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like it really is that kind of like rush back to the big brands. A big brand can be down for a while, an upstart can be up for a while. You can beat them on the field kind of in the short term, but over the long term, it's going to the laws of physics are going to go back to USC being where it is and Memphis being where it is, or something like that.
The comparisons to European soccer, I think, are pretty apt in a lot of ways. Right. So if you're a fan of an EPL team that's just hoping to crack the top 20 in the table, like you never hope to win the league. Like that basically never happens. And you are bothering to try to get a share of that revenue. And if you are coming in at a Man U or a Chelsea or something, and you have some gigantic oligarch bankrolling your team, it's a different sport, and your expectations and your goals are different. And you're right. You might, maybe Watford or Nottingham Forest or some other made-up team could come in there and beat one of those teams on any given day. But you're right. Inertia is a powerful force, and it skews towards the biggest brands in football.
Oh yeah. Well, so another big thing is the NIL, the name, image, likeness stuff. What do you think? We all know about kind of the big deals. The Quinn Ewers and all these kind of high end deals. Yeah. Do you think what do you think it's going to do all the way throughout the kind of the amateur landscape, the smaller sports, the Division III, as well as the big numbers that we hear? Do you think it's something that's a real revenue source for people? Do you think it's going to affect where people go to school?
Well, Let me think of the best way to answer that, because I think really when we talk about the NIL space, I think there's really two different markets. There's an NIL market for top 300-ish college football players and top 50-ish men's basketball players, predominantly in the Southeast, where there is money being exchanged for services that bear no relationship to how marketable they are, and that's really just a way of being a bag man over the table, and that's fine. But like
Another
that's
way, another is a recruiting tool.
it's explicitly a pay for play recruiting tool, and that was not the spirit of when this was allowed. There's still under the table transactions happening. Like that's always going to be a thing. But that's 350, 400 athletes of the thousands that participate in college sports. Um, I have been a believer even before this kind of started in July that literally every single college athlete, whether you are a starter or a bench player, whether you're at a big time D1 school or a Division III institution, all of them have a name, image, and likeness value greater than zero. It might not be a lot greater than zero, but it's going to be something. And if anybody wanted to make it a priority to really develop that and earn more money, they could. But then you have to treat it like a job, because that's what it is. I as a publisher, I did, I don't know, 10 of these deals with athletes to help promote Extra Points. I paid $150, $200 to someone to help promote what I was publishing and driving subs that way. And I wasn't working with starting quarterbacks at Alabama. I was working with track athletes or women's basketball players or MAC football players or offensive linemen and people who are good at Twitter, and that's fine. What I can tell you is that a lot of people are earning some money. And I don't want to sit here at my desk and be like, well, $750 isn't a big deal, because I remember what it was like to be 20
Oh
and
yeah,
be broke.
he had no money.
Right? I had no
Yeah,
money. 750
yeah.
bucks was almost 3 months rent in Columbus. I
Oh
did
yeah.
medical studies. I gave blood. I did clinical trials. I basically legally sold my body for like $2,000 because I had no money. So if someone wants to give me $2,000 to tweet something, like that's a big deal. And for me to sit here as a 34-year-old with like a mortgage and kids and scoff at that, which I think some of my reporter colleagues do, is stupid. Like 750, 500 bucks isn't just a PS5. Like that is a lot of money, especially if you're not on full scholarship, which most college athletes are not. Most sports are not headcount sports. You typically only get a partial. So
Exactly.
that's one thing here. The other thing I think it's important to note is that if you listen to football coaches or coaches in other sports and ask about NIL, they're all going to whine incessantly, and they're all going to say it's the most important thing in recruiting, and they're all going to say my school needs to invest more money in it, because if you're a coach, you're paid to win games, and so you are terrified of any tiny difference that you might have, even if it's just perceived, with any other school. That's why everyone builds these locker rooms with fountains in them and laser tag walls, even though nobody gives a crap about those. So we have
Yeah, yeah.
academic research to back that up. So some athletes will definitely pick where they go to school based on their earning potential, just like many undergraduates pick where to go study based on money, who's giving them the most
Yeah.
scholarships. But here's the thing, you and I both know this, not everybody does that. I don't know if you picked the absolute cheapest school when you were applying for college. I didn't. And candidly, part of the reason, one of the schools I was seriously considering was Case Western Reserve, which is a private school in Cleveland. And one of the reasons I didn't go there, because again, I wasn't thinking about this decision as a 34-year-old. I'm thinking about it as a 17-year-old. I'm thinking the weather in Cleveland sucks. This campus is 66% dude, and I haven't seen a pretty girl in the 2 weeks that I've been here. I'm going to make a very superficial decision. And that's what
Oh
college
yeah.
kids do.
Yeah.
So NIL is part of that. Location is part of that. Playing time is part of that. Relationship with the coach is part of that. All of these other factors. I think it is easy to look at Texas A&M's recruiting class and assume that's the way it's going to be in every sport for every class for every athlete forever. But if you even right now, if you like Ohio State released a statement that said only about 24% of their athletes are doing any NIL deals at all, like any. And when I talk to mid and low major ADs, it's generally 10 or under. So this isn't the most important factor for every single athlete. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And how involved do the schools get, or can the schools get? And doesn't it right now it's kind of like varies by state or something like that in terms of how much they can, uh, I don't know, oversee the
Well,
contracts or be, there's not a lot written out there as far as I guess like the association of, the school with the deal itself, or how is that looking? So
yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of this varies by state. Different states have different laws. Some states explicitly say in their state law that the university cannot broker the deal because then that makes it explicitly paid for play. Some don't say anything. Some states explicitly ban certain industries like gambling or marijuana or pornography. Some states don't. And in fact, literally, I've had compliance directors at some public schools in Florida say, we can't stop our athletes from doing a porno deal or a deal with a CBD company, as distasteful as you might find that, and how much we beg them not to do it. We, for our free speech, and because of the way this law is written, we can't do it.
mhm.
In Utah, they definitely can stop you, and they will. Like I've seen the paperwork. The other thing that is different is capacity. So Ohio State has an athletic department that's the size of a small Caribbean country. They have an indefinite number of staffers to throw at
Yeah.
almost anything. When I talk to, say, I don't know, somebody at Kennesaw State or Southern Illinois, Carbondale or something, and I ask them about NIL, they're like, "Look, brother, we've got one full-time compliance person, we have two graduate assistants, we have one full-time sports information director, and two graduate assistants. Even if the law says we can help, we don't have who's going to do it. Like
Yeah.
everyone here is already driving the bus and doing laundry anyway. We don't have time to or resources to pay someone 55 grand to shake down deals worth $600 for our athletes. All we can do is say, here's what you got to do to stay compliant with the NCAA. Please don't embarrass me. If you have any questions, call Open Doors or call Influencer, right?
Yeah.
And so I think right now, actually, I know there's an enormous gap between not just what schools feel like they can do to be compliant. Some schools don't care about being compliant, and what schools actually can do. Like, and sometimes those schools will say, Matt, will you come talk to our athletes and explain how this stuff works, because they don't have the money for something else. And like, great. That's just kind of the world we are.
That's awesome. And so what did Texas A&M do as it relates to, I guess, NIL, or, I've seen a couple headlines, but what exactly?
I do not know the exact financial instrument. Allegedly, boosters of Texas A&M helped set up LLCs and created guaranteed NIL opportunities for some of their incoming recruits in the 5 to 6 figures. It would not be shocking, given college football history, if anybody recruits a class that's like a standard deviation better than they normally would. Almost always there's a cash or gift inducement to do so.
Mm-hmm.
That's been that way since 1905. So whether this stuff happened above board, whether there was the Dodge Charger man who's giving cars out below board, we can't say for certain. And like me speaking personally, I don't care. Like if you called me up right now, it's like, I have proof that Texas A&M cheated. It'd be like, all right, I don't care. Go post that on Bama Online. I'm not the NCAA police.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be angry that some kids secured the bag because they're good at football. Jimbo Fisher is vehemently denying this, which I think is kind of funny. Coaches always get very defensive about this kind of thing, and it's possible he has plausible deniability. I'm not saying that he broke any NCAA rules or anybody from Texas A&M staff did. All I am saying is this is a school that has a lot of rich boosters. They have signed the greatest recruiting class on paper in college football history. They have been perennially 8-4 in my lifetime. You don't need to be Wikipedia Brown to kind of connect the dots to figure out what might have happened here. I don't think it was just because Jimbo's a great football coach.
They got their foot on the gas.
Yeah, the parlance we like to use is they are recruiting to win. They are playing for keeps, recruiting. And friends, you can interpret that statement any way you like.
Yeah. Well, I read a book. I don't know if I have it. I think it's this Necessary Roughness. Have you read this book?
No, but I am aware of it. Yeah. This has been going on for forever.
Oh yeah, there's a thing in there where I think it was TCU. They had a running back, and he just went on the private plane of the booster, and they took a legal pad and they just wrote out a contract You get 20,000 a year to come here, sign here. And they had the contract and people found it later. They just wrote it out explicitly. 20,000 a year.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be a crappy bag, man. You're not supposed to write that stuff down. We have Signal,
Exactly.
use Bitcoin, or a very popular thing in the South would be casino chips, where you might take a recruit out to dinner, and maybe he decides to go to the Biloxi casino, and there's a bag with a bunch of chips, and he cashes them out. And well, look, Uncle Sam, NCAA, I don't know what to tell you. It's illegal for this young man to be gambling.
Yeah.
There's ways to do this. I would not write anything down and sign my name personally, but I don't
I
have
know,
that
but
Batman
that
money
just
yet.
shows how
Yeah.
out there they were.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing, like when I was in school, you'd always hear about like, a booster has the, basketball player come mow the lawn or come watch somebody mow the lawn and they get, $1,500 cash or $2,000 cash for doing that, and it's like, well, they were just doing a job. It's like, well, was that job open to everybody or just, the point guard for your, Final Four team?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the Yeah. This is how things used to go before athletic scholarships were legalized nationwide. Is then you would just do show jobs because and it was easier for Big Ten schools to do this because they were generally in bigger cities. It was the Southern schools that were generally more rural areas that were pitching athletic scholarships. Yale in like 1904, 1905, they were doing NIL deals. They would make a star football player the on-campus salesman for like cigarettes, and they'd kick him, give him a kickback for some of the money, or they let them sell scorecards or let them sell tickets. I am not somebody. I feel like I know the history of the sport well enough to be clear-eyed. Think like I just don't care about any of this. I know some people will get very indignant about how this is a flagrant violation of the sacred ideals of amateurism. Like, nah, all that stuff sucks. I am not going to accuse anybody of cheating, but I would hope that if athletes are coming to my alma mater, I hope they are securing the bag in one way or another because their skills are valuable, and in this country, people should be paid for their labor.
Oh yeah, and it's like you said, you were, struggling with money in college, and there's a lot of athletes that are on full scholarship or 90% scholarship, especially in other sports like, track and stuff like that. They don't have a lot of money. They're just scraping by and they're doing a lot for the school and
Yeah, everybody else is making money.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind of, it's like the old Olympics, the Olympics has all these amateur ideals and everybody thought it's going to be game over once, Steve Prefontaine doesn't have to live in a trailer. And then you realize like, oh, it's fine. And it's even better. And the Olympics, no one cares that there's professionals in the Olympics.
Yep,
It just makes the Olympics better.
That's my opinion here too. I know there's a generational divide about some of these things in college athletics. If I talk to an AD that's been doing this for 30 years, they freak out a little bit more than somebody who's maybe closer to my age and just recognizes like this has always evolved. We used to think that athletic scholarships would ruin amateurism and break everything, and now we look at that as an opportunity for income advancement and for helping with class mobility, and as like a beautiful part of college athletics.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm very bullish about, honest to God, the educational component of NIL. I know that not everybody feels that same way, but I suspect we'll look back on this in a decade and this enterprise is still functioning and people still care.
Oh yeah. What do you mean by the educational opportunity of the?
So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you are where did you go to school?
Memphis.
Memphis. Okay. Yeah. So let's say you are a shooting guard at the University of Memphis. And Memphis will tell the NCAA that's a 20-hour week responsibility, but you and I and Penny Hardaway know that it's a lot more than that. And even when you're not in the season, you can't go study. You can't just be like, all right, Penny, I'm doing a study abroad in Italy. Like I'll see you next semester, right? Like you can't do that as an athlete. You often can't even work at all. So your world automatically then on campus shrinks. It may be difficult for you to be in a fraternity or any other kind of like or formalized campus group. Your world is basketball, class, and the athletics building. And because of that, you're going to have some doors that are going to be closed to you because you can't network and see the world outside of basketball the same way that maybe some of your peers do. But with NIL, now you have an opportunity to build some of those relationships, and the school can't tell you no. The sports information director can't hide you or anything. So if you want to do a deal with, say, a local financial advisor to help promote that industry, and then have a chance to learn about business development, to learn about finance or real estate or other industries where you might work when you're done playing basketball, through NIL, now your professional circle has grown. Your ability to learn entrepreneurial skills has grown. And that would be my advice to everybody here, because the $500,000 crypto or autograph or baloney deals are going to get the big headlines. But the thing is here at Memphis, babe, listen, maybe one guy on this roster is going to have a professional basketball career that lasts more than 4 years. And maybe 4 of you on this 85-man football roster are going to be playing football again in 4 years. So everybody else, you gotta get people. So when you come back to Memphis when you're 25, or when you go back to Oxford or Pensacola or Houston or whatever it is that you're from, that you have a network of professionals, a network of people to help build you up for whatever's next. And I honest to God believe, done correctly, NIL can help facilitate and build that for people that don't have that social capital.
Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't heard anybody explain it that way, but I think you're totally right. It's that real world. You're in a real world business deal that you definitely would not have had the opportunity to do before, because you are kind of nonstop the whole time you're there.
That's right. So it's cool, because then you not only get to learn about a new industry, but you are also now an entrepreneur of Matt Brown LLC, right? Where I'm managing Matt Brown's Instagram and Twitter, and I'm thinking about what my brand actually means. And now I got to work in business development, because I got to hop on Open Doors and pitch myself to brands. I got to figure out how to file my W-9s. Like, that's all real world stuff. Yeah. And that's the kind of, in a perfect world, it's what you go to college to learn. So as I see those gears turning for some people, especially that people that didn't hang out with business owners, or that don't have daddy's country club to go back to when they're done, I get excited about that, because this is what we're supposed to be. This is part of the point of college sports, I think.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think that's about all I've got. Is there something you want to add, or is there any component of college sports that's exciting you right now, or that you're interested in digging into that you want to discuss? Or
this world is something I'm fascinated by. I'm fascinated by how schools earn money and then decide where to use that money, whether that's in athletics or somewhere else. I'll give you an example, right? So a big part of my newsletter covers how schools sell tickets, which at Ohio State is just you open the door, and you don't ever have to do any outbound sales. At Memphis, you might have to do a little bit, and if you're at the University of New Orleans, or if you're at Southern Miss, or Central Arkansas, then you absolutely do have to get up there and shill tickets, right? How these schools get money from their multimedia rights, their sponsorship group. It's like not their tier 1 ESPN deal, but selling billboards and selling ads in the program and selling the signage on the basketball court, and how they utilize that money, and how they're kind of building around the future, whether that's NIL or different kind of capital projects. I'm also building a database of a lot of this information. So in a perfect world, right, and you can see a lot of these documents on Extra Points NB right now. We want it so you can look at every university's athletic budget, their coaches for their contracts, so their football, men's and women's basketball coaches. The women's basketball coach salaries aren't published right now, because no one's actually bothered to look them all up. The last thing I'm doing is trying to do that same thing for esports, which is something that more and more universities, especially smaller schools, are really investing in. Because if you are a smaller school, right, if you're Mississippi College, or I don't know, like North Alabama or something. If you're North Alabama, you can't beat Alabama in anything that Alabama wants to beat you at in any sport. But for $400,000, you can get a bunch of computers and hire an esports coach. And if you are smart about this, you can kick Alabama's butt in Call of Duty or 2K or Fortnite or any other things. And that's happening right now. Like, Alabama will play some of these like tiny Bible colleges in Georgia, or these liberal arts schools in the Northeast, and get the tar kicked out of them. And then these schools are using that to boost their male enrollment, which is a hard thing to do. So I'm trying to get some more money, getting more documents to show the money behind that, and a pathway for schools to go down that same road. So those are some of the big stories that I'm working on there. And you can find the financial disclosures for free on extrapointsmb.com.
That's awesome. Well, this was super enlightening, and you're definitely welcome back anytime. I mean, this is stuff that I'm interested in, and I'm sure the audience as well, because it's that the whole money in sports, and you focus on the university aspect of it, but it's just tremendous because it drives so much, and people don't they tend not to look behind the curtain at all.
Yeah. This is how the sausage gets made. Sometimes it's boring, but sometimes well, I think once you understand a little bit more, you can see how it's exciting and interesting, and explains why some programs are great and some programs that you would look at and say, you've got great geography. And what's the problem? Why they suck. Or why they struggle sometimes, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, you can find that at Extra Points MB. You can get 2 of those newsletters are free, and but it does publish every weekday. You can also become a paying subscriber and get access to everything on that website.
awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Awesome.